I didn't come here to be seen. The auditorium at West Point stretches out like a cathedral. 1,500 folding chairs arranged in perfect rows. Families clutching programs' phones raised to capture every second. The kind of pride that fills a room until it's hard to breathe. I'm standing in the back row, pressed against the wall. Plain black jacket jeans that have seen better days. My posture is military straight out of habit, but I keep my shoulders angled away from the crowd. Invisible. That's how I've learned to exist. The cadets file across the stage in their dress grays, each step synchronized like clockwork. I scan their faces until I find him. Danny, 22 years old. Aaron's son, my brother's boy. He's taller than I expected, broader through the shoulders. But when he turns his head slightly, catching the light from the stage floods, I see Aaron's profile. The same stubborn jawline. The same way of holding his chin when he's nervous. My chest tightens. The general steps forward to present the commissions. A man in his 60s, chest heavy with ribbons, voice, carrying the weight of decades in uniform. He begins the ceremonial words, but something makes him pause, mid-sentence. His eyes sweep the crowd. They find me. The recognition hits his face like a physical blow. His mouth opens slightly. The auditorium falls silent, except for the low hum of the air conditioning. Sergeant Webb. The words carry across the room. Every head turns. Kandahar, 2013, is that you? A murmur ripples through the families, whispers, heads swiveling to find who he's looking at. I feel 1,500 pairs of eyes searching, probing. I don't move, I don't breathe. Danny hears it. He's halfway through, raising his hand for the oath. His arm freezes in mid-salute, fingers still curved but trembling now. His head turns toward the back of the room, following the general's gaze. Our eyes lock. For a moment, the world narrows to just that connection. Him on the stage in his perfect uniform, me in the shadows, wearing clothes that don't belong in this place. The distance between us feels like miles and inches at the same time. I see the recognition dawn in his face, not just of me, but of something deeper. A question he's been carrying without knowing it. His hand wavers. The perfect military posture cracks just enough to show the boy underneath. The general clears his throat, breaking the spell. My apologies. Please continue. But the damage is done. The moment has been opened like a wound. Danny completes his salute, but his movements are mechanical now. His eyes drift back to me twice during the ceremony. I catch him looking, and each time I have to resist the urge to turn and walk away. I came to watch from the shadows, like I always have. I've been watching him for years, from parking lots outside his high school football games, from the back of coffee shops when he'd study with friends, from across the street when he came home for Christmas, standing in the driveway with his mother while she pretended I didn't exist. I never got close enough to cast a shadow. But that moment, that's when everything started to crack open. The general's voice drifts over the crowd as he continues the ceremony, but I'm not listening anymore. I'm watching Danny's face, seeing the questions form behind his eyes, the same questions I've been carrying for 15 years. When the ceremony ends and the families surge forward with flowers and cameras, I slip toward the side exit. But I can feel him looking for me in the crowd. I can feel everything about to change. My name is Claire Webb. Oldest daughter, forgotten sister, disgraced soldier, depending on who you ask. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time when I was the one they called first. The one who showed up early and stayed late. The one who remembered birthdays and fixed what was broken and made sure everyone else was okay before I even thought about myself. I was the reliable one. Aaron was different. 3 years younger, but he lit up every room he walked into. People gravitated toward him like he was the sun, and they were planets caught in his orbit. He had this laugh that started deep in his chest and bubbled up until everyone around him was laughing too, even if they didn't know why. Mom used to say I was her steady hand and Aaron was her beating heart. Aaron got the scholarships. I got the summer jobs to help pay for his books. Aaron got the standing ovations at graduation. I got the folding chair in the back clapping until my hands hurt. I didn't mind. That's what big sisters do. He was brilliant. Not just smart brilliant in the way that made professors remember his name years later. He could have been anything. Doctor, lawyer, engineer. But he chose the army. Said he wanted to serve something bigger than himself. I was already enlisted by then. Had been for 2 years. When he told me he was joining up, I felt proud and terrified in equal measure. "You don't have to follow me," I told him. He grinned. "Who says I'm following? Maybe I'm leading." We served on different continents. I was stationed in Kentucky, then Kansas, then Indiana. He went to officer training, then deployment after deployment. Afghanistan, Iraq, back to Afghanistan. We'd email when we could call when time zones aligned. His letters were full of stories about his men, his missions, his growing family. He'd married Sarah right after his first deployment. They had Danny 2 years later. My letters were shorter, logistics mostly. Where I was stationed, what I was doing. I never told him about the loneliness. Never told him how it felt to be the web sister who didn't glow. Then came the phone call. Training accident. Helicopter went down during a routine exercise. Aaron and 3 other officers. No survivors. I requested emergency leave immediately. Packed a bag in 10 minutes. Drove 17 hours straight from Fort Knox to home. But I never made it to the funeral. The family made sure of that. They said I chose the Army over them. Said I was too busy playing soldier to show up when it mattered. Said I didn't care enough to drop everything and be there. They were wrong about the caring part. But they were right about one thing: I wasn't there when they lowered my brother into the ground. The blame landed on me like a landslide, heavy and sudden and impossible to dig out from under. It didn't matter that I'd tried to come home. It didn't matter that I'd been driving through the night with tears streaming down my face, calling every hour to check on arrangements. What mattered was the empty seat where I should have been. Mom stopped taking my calls. Dad pretended I didn't exist. Sarah, Aaron's widow, blocked my number. Cousins, aunts, uncles, family, friends. One by one, they all turned away. I became the sister who abandoned the family, the one who cared more about her career than her brother's funeral, the one who broke their hearts when they were already shattered. But no one ever asked why. No one wanted to know that I'd been 20 minutes away when the service started. No one cared that I'd sat in a parking lot outside the funeral home watching through the windows as they carried Aaron's casket to the hearse. No one asked why I didn't walk inside. They just decided I was selfish, decided I was cruel, decided I was everything wrong with the world, and they were done with me. The truth was smaller and sharper than their anger, but the truth would have destroyed them, and I couldn't do that to Aaron's memory. So I let them hate me instead. I moved to a town where no one knew my name, took a job driving delivery trucks, rented a 1-bedroom apartment with thin walls and thinner curtains, started a life that fit in the spaces between other people's lives. I watched Danny grow up from a distance, school plays I'd never attend, baseball games I'd never cheer at, graduation ceremonies I'd never be invited to, until today. Maybe you know what it's like to carry the weight and still be the one blamed when it all falls apart. Maybe you know what it's like to love someone so much that you'll let them hate you if it means protecting them from something worse. Maybe you know what it's like to be erased from your own family's story, one photograph at a time. Or maybe you don't. But I'm going to tell you anyway, because for the first time in 15 years, someone looked at me and saw me. Really saw me. And everything I've been carrying is about to come spilling out. The call came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday in March. I was at Fort Knox 3 months into a logistics rotation that should have been routine. Inventory management, supply chain coordination, the kind of work that keeps an army running but never makes headlines. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when my phone buzzed against the nightstand. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was home. Sergeant Webb speaking. Claire, a woman's voice, shaky. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Morrison. I'm calling from Fort Campbell. There's been an accident." The world tilted. "Your brother's Staff Sergeant Aaron Webb. There was a training exercise. A helicopter went down." The words came at me like bullets. Training accident, mechanical failure, no survivors. I don't remember hanging up. I don't remember getting dressed. But somehow I was standing in my commanding officer's office at 0430, requesting emergency leave. "Family emergency, Sergeant. My brother, he's gone." The paperwork was approved in minutes. Bereavement leave, 7 days. I had a bag packed and was in my car before the sun came up. But first I had to call home. I sat in the parking lot outside the base engine running phone, trembling in my hand. I hadn't spoken to my mother in 6 months. Our last conversation had ended with her telling me I was too busy being a soldier to remember I had a family. She answered on the 3rd ring. Hello? Mom, it's Claire. Silence. Mom? I know about Aaron. I'm driving home right now. I can be there by don't. The word hit like a slap. Don't what? Don't come. Everyone knows you've moved on. Don't pretend now. I gripped the phone tighter. What are you talking about? Aaron is my brother. Of course I'm coming. Your brother called you every week. Every week, Claire. You know how many times you called him back. I did know. The number sat in my stomach like a stone. Mom, you were what, busy, too important, you couldn't find 5 minutes to call your own brother. The truth was more complicated than that. Aaron's calls always came when I was working, when I was in training, when I was knee-deep in 18-hour shifts and barely keeping my head above water. I'd meant to call back. I'd planned to call back. I'd just never gotten around to it. I'm coming to the funeral, I said. I need to be there. Sarah doesn't want you there. Sarah, Aaron's wife, the woman who's been raising his son while you've been playing soldier. She said you made your choice a long time ago. I didn't make any choice. I'm his sister. You're a stranger wearing his sister's name. The line went quiet. I could hear voices in the background, people moving around, making arrangements, holding each other up, life continuing without me. Mom, please, I just need to know when. The dial tone cut me off. I called back. Straight to voicemail. I called the funeral home. They gave me the date and time, but nothing else. No details about the service. No information about arrangements. Just the basics. I drove anyway. 17 hours from Fort Knox to home. I stopped only for gas and coffee, pushing through the night with my brother's face in my mind. Aaron at 8 years old, missing his front teeth. Aaron at 16, teaching me to parallel park. Aaron at 25, in his dress blues, grinning at his wedding. Aaron at 32, in a flag-draped coffin. I arrived 20 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. The funeral home parking lot was packed. Cars lined the street for 3 blocks. I'd never seen so many people in one place for our family. But there was no place for me. I sat in my car watching through the windows as people filed inside. Neighbors, high school friends, fellow soldiers. Sarah dressed in black, carrying Danny on her hip. He was 7 years old, too young to understand why everyone was crying. I got out once. Made it as far as the front steps before I saw my mother standing in the doorway greeting mourners. She looked right through me. Not angry, not hurt, just empty. Like I wasn't there at all. I went back to my car. I found a motel 6 blocks away. Paid cash for a room with a view of nothing. The clerk behind the desk looked at me like I was trouble, but he took my money and handed me a key. The funeral home had a live stream. I watched it on my phone, sitting on the edge of a bed that smelled like disinfectant and other people's grief. The pastor talked about Aaron's service, his dedication, his love for his family. Sarah spoke about their life together, their plans for the future, the hole his absence would leave. Danny sat in the front row, too quiet for a 7-year-old. Other people stood up, shared memories, talked about Aaron's laugh, his kindness, his brilliant mind. They painted a picture of a man who'd touched every life he'd encountered. My name was never mentioned, not once. It was like I'd never existed. Like the first 18 years of Aaron's life, the years when it was just him and me against the world, had been erased. I watched them lower my brother into the ground from a motel room with broken air conditioning and stains on the carpet. That was the day I realized I didn't belong to them anymore. Maybe I never had. I tried for 3 years. 3 years of phone calls that went straight to voicemail. 3 years of emails that bounced back with automated responses. 3 years of letters that disappeared into the void without so much as a receipt confirmation. I wrote to my mother every month. Short letters, nothing dramatic. Updates on where I was stationed, what I was doing. I told her about the sunset over the Kansas plains, about the diner where I ate breakfast on Sundays, about the stray cat that had started following me around base. I never mentioned Aaron directly, never pushed, just tried to keep a thread of connection alive. The letters came back unopened. Return to sender written in my mother's careful script across the front. I called Sarah once, just once. It was Danny's 8th birthday and I wanted to know if he was okay, if he was getting help dealing with his father's death, if he needed anything. She picked up by mistake. I could hear Danny laughing in the background and for a moment my heart lifted. Sarah, it's Claire. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I just wanted to. Don't call here. I'm not trying to cause problems. I just want to know how Danny is doing. Danny doesn't need you confusing him. He's been through enough. I'm not trying to confuse anyone. I'm his aunt. No, she said, and her voice was ice. You're the woman who couldn't be bothered to show up to his father's funeral. You're the woman who abandoned this family when we needed you most. The line went dead. I kept calling anyway. Different numbers, different approaches. I tried reaching out to cousins, to family friends, to anyone who might listen. They all had the same story, the same narrative that had been carved in stone the day Aaron died. Claire Webb didn't care enough to come home. Claire Webb chose the army over her family. Claire Webb broke her mother's heart and left them all to grieve alone. I found out how deep the story had gone when my cousin Jessica got married 2 years later. I wasn't invited, but I saw the photos on Facebook. The reception slideshow cycled through decades of family memories. I was in half those photos originally. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family vacations. But in the slideshow, I'd been cropped out of every single one. Cut away so cleanly you'd never know someone was missing. 25 years of family history, and I'd been erased from all of it. The comments under the photos told the real story. Beautiful family, so sad about Aaron. At least Sarah has all of you to lean on. Some people just can't handle being there when it matters. She didn't even show up to Aaron's funeral. That phrase followed me everywhere, whispered in grocery stores back home when I'd visit, shared in Facebook groups where people thought I couldn't see, repeated like a prayer, like a warning, like a curse. She didn't even show up to Aaron's funeral. No one knew the truth. No one cared to ask. They chose to believe I was selfish. They chose to believe I was cruel. They chose to believe I was everything wrong with the world, and it was easier than asking why. Easier than wondering if maybe the story was more complicated than it looked. By the 4th year, I stopped trying. I finished my tour in Kansas and put in for a transfer. Somewhere small, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could disappear completely. I found a town in Indiana with a population of 8,000. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, but no one asks too many questions if you keep to yourself. I rented a studio apartment above a hardware store, got a job driving delivery routes for a medical supply company, spent my days on rural highways, dropping off oxygen tanks and wheelchairs and hospital beds to people who needed them. It was honest work, quiet work, the kind of work that lets you think. I lived alone, ate dinner alone, watched movies alone, went to bed alone and woke up alone, and told myself it was better this way. No one to disappoint, no one to hurt, no one to let down when the world fell apart. But every year on August 15th, I sent Danny a card, never signed, never with a return address, just a birthday card with a $20 bill tucked inside and a note that said, "Happy birthday. Someone is thinking of you." I bought them from different stores, mailed them from different post offices, made sure there was no way to trace them back to me. I didn't know if he got them. I didn't know if Sarah threw them away or if Danny ever wondered who they were from. But I sent them anyway. It was the only connection I had left, the only way to touch the edges of the family I'd lost. On his 10th birthday, I sent a card with a baseball on the front. I'd heard through the grapevine that he was playing Little League. On his 13th, I sent one with a guitar. Someone had posted a video of him playing at a school talent show. On his 16th, I sent one with a graduation cap. High school was coming. I never signed my name, never left a clue, but I hoped somewhere, somehow, he knew he was loved, even if he didn't know who was doing the loving. That was my life for 15 years. Invisible, forgotten, erased, until the day I stood in the back of that auditorium and heard a general call my name, until the day everything I'd been carrying started to crack open. The wooden box started as a shop class project when I was 16. Aaron was 13 then, all elbows and knees, and that crooked smile that made teachers forgive him for turning in homework 3 days late. He'd discovered chemistry that year and spent most dinners explaining molecular structures to anyone who'd listen. I was taking woodworking to fill an elective requirement. Mr. Peterson, the shop teacher, was a Vietnam vet who believed in teaching kids to make things with their hands. Everything's plastic and digital now, he'd say, running his fingers over a piece of oak. But wood remembers, wood lasts. The assignment was simple: build a box. Any size, any design, as long as it had 4 sides, a bottom, and a lid that opened and closed properly. Most kids made pencil boxes or jewelry cases, simple rectangles with basic hinges. I spent 3 months on mine, I chose cherry wood because Aaron loved the color. Cut each piece by hand, sanded until my fingertips were raw. I learned how to cut dovetail joints from YouTube videos, practiced on scraps, until I could make them tight and clean. The lid was the hardest part. I wanted it to fit perfectly, no gaps, no wobble. I must have adjusted it 50 times before Mr. Peterson finally nodded his approval. I carved Aaron's initials into the top, AJW Aaron James Webb. "What's this for?" Aaron asked when I gave it to him for Christmas that year. "Whatever you want to keep safe," I told him. He used it for everything. Baseball cards first, then guitar picks when he went through his musician phase, junior year. Later it held college acceptance letters, photographs of the watch our grandfather left him. When he graduated from state with a degree in engineering, I gave him the box again. This time I'd lined the inside with blue velvet and added a small brass nameplate for the things that matter most. "You made this?" he asked, running his fingers over the smooth finish. 4 years ago, I just improved it. He hugged me, then the kind of hug that lifts you off your feet. "I'm keeping this forever, you know that." He did keep it. Through officer training, through deployments, through marriage and fatherhood. It moved from barracks to base housing to the small apartment he and Sarah shared before Danny was born. He wrote to me about it once. We were both overseas, him in Afghanistan, me in Germany, and he'd sent a rare long email instead of his usual quick check-ins. "Claire, you remember that box you made me? I keep all my important stuff in it now. The ultrasound photos of Danny, letters from Sarah, the last letter Dad wrote before he died. It's like a time capsule of everything good in my life. Every time I open it, I remember I have people worth coming home to." When Aaron died, the Army packed his personal effects and shipped them to Sarah. Standard procedure. Footlocker duffel bags and one small wooden box that looked out of place among the military-issued gear. Sarah called me that day, the only time she'd spoken to me since Aaron's death. "There's a box here," she said. Her voice was hollow, exhausted. "It has your initials carved in the bottom." I'd forgotten about that. A tiny signature I'd added before the final coat of varnish, CW 2009. "It was a gift," I said, "from when we were kids. There's something inside with your name on it." My heart stopped. "Sarah, a letter, sealed. It says, 'For Danny from Aunt Claire.' When did you write this? The letter?" I'd forgotten about the letter. I'd written it the night before Aaron's wedding, sitting in a hotel room with too much wine and too many emotions. A letter to the nephew I'd never met, telling him about his father as a boy. About the brother who'd taught me to drive stick shift and helped me with calculus and always believed I was stronger than I felt. I'd sealed it and hidden it in the bottom of the box underneath the velvet lining. A time capsule of my own. "I wrote it years ago," I said, "before Danny was born." "What does it say?" I closed my eyes. "It tells him about Aaron, about who his father was before the Army, before marriage, just family stories." Sarah was quiet for a long time. "You should have asked permission." "I know, I'm sorry. You can't just insert yourself into his life like this, not after everything." "I'm not trying to insert myself anywhere. I wrote it when I thought things would be different." "Well, they're not different." Her voice hardened. "They're exactly what you made them." She hung up. I never found out what happened to the letter. For years I wondered if she'd thrown it away, if she'd burned it, if she'd read it herself and decided it was poison. The box disappeared too. No more mentions of it. No photos of Danny with his father's things. It was like the box and the letter inside it had been erased along with everything else. But I knew what the letter said. I'd memorized every word before I sealed it. "Danny, if you're reading this, it means you've become the man your father always believed you'd be. He used to talk about you before you were even born, about the boy who would carry the best parts of him into the world. I'm your Aunt Claire, and I want you to know that your father was the kindest, smartest, most generous person I've ever known. He taught me how to be brave, how to stand up for what's right, how to love someone more than you love yourself. He would be so proud of the man you've become. I hope someday you'll know that you were loved by more people than you realize, even the ones who couldn't stay." I'd signed it with just my name, Claire, not Aunt Claire, not Sergeant Webb, just Claire. The sister who'd loved Aaron before the world knew his name. The aunt who'd loved Danny before he knew he needed loving. For 15 years I'd assumed that letter was gone, destroyed, lost to the same anger that had erased me from every family photo. I never imagined it might be waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right reason to surface. I never imagined it might be the key to everything I'd lost. 2 weeks before graduation, Danny's mother asked him to clean out the basement. "I can't keep looking at all this stuff," Sarah said, standing at the top of the stairs with her arms wrapped around herself. "Your father's things. I know I should have dealt with it years ago, but..." She didn't finish the sentence. 15 years later, Aaron's death still lived in the spaces between words. Danny had been avoiding the basement too. It was easier to pretend those boxes didn't exist. Easier to live with the sanitized version of his father that lived in framed photos and carefully curated stories. But he was 22 now, about to become an officer, about to carry his father's name into the world in ways that mattered. He owed it to both of them to face what was down there. The basement smelled like cardboard and dust and time. Aaron's military effects were stacked in the corner where they'd been placed 15 years ago. Foot Locker duffel bags, and a few smaller boxes that Sarah had never been able to open. Danny started with the Foot Locker, uniforms still crisp in their plastic dry cleaning bags, ribbons and medals in a presentation case, a photo of Sarah and baby Danny tucked into the lid. The duffel bags held books mostly, military manuals, a few paperbacks, a journal with Aaron's careful handwriting documenting training exercises and deployment schedules. Then he found the wooden box. It was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 8 inches square. The cherry wood had darkened with age, but the craftsmanship was beautiful. Smooth joints, perfect corners, a lid that fit like it had been made by someone who cared about getting it right. There were initials carved into the top, AJW, his father's initials. Danny lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in blue velvet that had faded to gray, were the pieces of Aaron Webb that no one talked about anymore. A photo caught his attention first. 2 teenagers sitting on a front porch, arms around each other's shoulders. The boy was unmistakably his father, younger, leaner, but with the same stubborn jawline Danny saw in the mirror every morning. The girl beside him was a stranger. She looked maybe 17, 18. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, eyes that held more weight than a teenager should carry. She was wearing what looked like a Letterman jacket, too big for her, probably borrowed. But it was her smile that stopped him. Not forced or posed like most family photos. Real. The kind of smile that said she belonged exactly where she was. Danny flipped the photo over. Someone had written in faded ink, "Claire and Aaron, 2005, last day of senior year. Claire." The name hit him like a physical blow. He'd heard it whispered throughout his childhood, always in the context of disappointment. The sister who hadn't cared enough to come home. The aunt who'd abandoned the family when they needed her most. But this girl in the photo looked like she'd fight anyone who tried to hurt the boy beside her. Danny kept digging. Underneath the photo was an envelope. Yellowed with age, sealed with tape that had long since lost its stickiness. His name was written across the front in careful script, for Danny from Aunt Claire. His hands shook as he opened it. The letter was written on plain paper, the ink slightly faded but still legible. The handwriting was precise, controlled, the handwriting of someone who'd been taught that words mattered. "Danny, if you're reading this, it means you've become the man your father always believed you'd be." He had to stop reading, had to sit down on the concrete floor of the basement and breathe for a minute. This wasn't the voice of the woman his family had described. This wasn't cold or selfish or cruel. This was the voice of someone who'd loved him before he was born. He kept reading. "He used to talk about you before you were even born, about the boy who would carry the best parts of him into the world. I'm your Aunt Claire, and I want you to know that your father was the kindest, smartest, most generous person I've ever known." The words blurred. Danny wiped his eyes and kept going. "He taught me how to be brave, how to stand up for what's right, how to love someone more than you love yourself. He would be so proud of the man you've become. I hope someday you'll know that you were loved by more people than you realize, even the ones who couldn't stay." Danny read the letter 3 times before the words really sank in. This woman, this aunt he'd been taught to dismiss, had known his father in ways no one had ever shared with him. She'd known Aaron as a brother, not just as a soldier or a husband or a father. She'd known him as a boy. The letter continued with stories Danny had never heard. Aaron teaching Claire to parallel park in an empty parking lot. both of them laughing until they cried. Aaron staying up all night to help her with calculus before her final exam. Aaron defending her to their parents when she enlisted, even though he was scared she'd get hurt. Your father believed in people. He believed in second chances and hard work and doing the right thing even when it cost you. He believed in family, not just the family you're born with, but the family you choose, the family you fight for, the family you never give up on. The letter ended simply. If no one else tells you this, I've always been proud of you. From the moment you were born until this very second, you have been loved by someone you've never met. Someone who thinks about you every August 15th. Someone who hopes you become everything your father dreamed you could be. Love, Claire. Danny sat in that basement for an hour, holding the letter and staring at the photo of his father and a girl who looked like she'd burn the world down to protect him. Nothing made sense anymore. The story he'd been told, the story everyone believed, didn't match the warmth in these words. Didn't match the grief he could feel bleeding through the ink. Didn't match the woman who'd cared enough to write to a nephew she'd never met. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He didn't tell his mother what he'd found. Didn't mention it to his grandmother or his cousins or anyone else who'd spent 15 years repeating the same narrative. But he carried it with him, to classes, to formation, to mess hall and study sessions and late-night conversations with his roommates about what it meant to be an officer. He carried it with him because, for the first time in his life, he had questions that mattered. And he had a feeling the answers were going to change everything. The letter had been in Danny's jacket pocket for 2 weeks. He'd carried it through final exams, through dress rehearsals, through sleepless nights, when he'd pulled it out and read it again by the light of his phone. The paper was getting soft from handling the creases wearing thin, but the words never lost their weight. Now he was standing in formation with his classmates, waiting to cross the stage and receive his commission. The auditorium was packed with families, cameras flashing, the kind of proud chaos that comes with milestone moments. He'd scanned the crowd during the opening remarks, looking for his mother, his grandmother, the cousins who'd made the trip to see him graduate. They were there in the third row, beaming at him with the kind of pride that made his chest tight. But his eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, looking for someone who wouldn't be there. Someone who'd been erased from every family photo, every family story, every family gathering for the past 15 years. Someone who'd written him a letter that changed everything he thought he knew about his own history. When his name was called, he walked across the stage with his back straight and his head high. This was the moment he'd been working toward for 4 years. The moment when he stopped being a cadet and became an officer in the United States Army. The moment when he'd officially follow in his father's footsteps. The general stepped forward to present his commission. A man in his 60s with steel gray hair and ribbons that told the story of a career spent in service. He'd done this ceremony hundreds of times, probably thousands. But something made him pause. The general's eyes weren't on Danny anymore. They were scanning the crowd, searching for something that had caught his attention. His expression shifted from ceremonial politeness to something sharper. Recognition. Sergeant Webb. The words carried across the auditorium, cutting through the polite murmur of families, waiting for their own sons and daughters to cross the stage. Danny felt his stomach drop. Kandahar, 2013. Is that you? A ripple of confusion moved through the crowd. Heads turning, voices whispering. The ceremony had stopped, suspended in a moment that belonged to someone else entirely. Danny followed the general's gaze toward the back of the hall and saw her. She was standing against the wall in the last row, wearing a plain black jacket and jeans that had seen better days. Her posture was military straight, but her shoulders were angled away from the crowd, like she was trying to disappear. She looked older than the girl in the photograph, weathered in the way that comes from carrying too much for too long. But her eyes were the same, dark, serious, holding more weight than anyone should have to bear. Their eyes met across the length of the auditorium. For a moment, everything else fell away. The crowd, the ceremony, the general still frozen mid-presentation. It was just Danny and the woman who'd written him a letter 15 years ago, telling him he was loved by someone he'd never met. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for him to see the recognition in her face. Long enough for him to see the pain there, too carefully controlled, but unmistakable. Then she looked down, not ashamed, not guilty, just tired. like she'd been standing in the back of rooms her whole life watching other people's moments from a distance. The general cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "My apologies. Please continue." But the damage was done. The moment had been cracked open, and 15 years of carefully constructed silence was spilling out. Danny completed his oath with his hand raised and his voice steady. He shook the general's hand, accepted his commission, walked back to his place in formation. But everything had changed. He knows now. The woman in the back of the room wasn't the cold, selfish person his family had described. She was the woman who'd written about loving someone more than you love yourself. The woman who'd stood 20 minutes away from Aaron's funeral and chose not to go inside. The woman who'd been sending him unsigned birthday cards for 15 years. As the ceremony continued around him, Danny found himself thinking about the letter in his pocket. About the photograph of two teenagers who looked like they'd protect each other against the world. About the aunt who'd been erased from his family's story, but had never stopped loving him from a distance. In that moment, I saw Aaron in his eyes. And for the first time in 15 years, he saw me. Not the version his family had created. Not the villain in their story of grief and abandonment. Just me, Claire Webb. The sister who'd made a wooden box with her own hands. The aunt who'd written a letter to a nephew she'd never met. The woman who'd spent 15 years in the shadows, loving people who'd forgotten she existed. The woman who'd driven 17 hours to watch a funeral from a motel room, because walking inside would have destroyed the only family Aaron had left. Danny saw me. And for the first time since that phone call at Fort Knox, I felt like maybe the truth was finally going to matter. I slipped out through the side door while families were still hugging and taking photos on the stage. 15 years of practice had taught me how to disappear from rooms without anyone noticing. How to find the exits before I needed them. How to move through crowds like smoke there and gone before anyone could pin me down. The parking lot was mostly empty. A few stragglers heading to their cars, their voices carrying across the asphalt in excited bursts. Plans for dinner, for celebration, for marking a moment that would live in family stories for generations. I made it halfway to my truck before I heard footsteps behind me. "Excuse me." I knew the voice before I turned around. Deeper than Aaron's had been, but with the same careful way of choosing words. The same pause before speaking, like he was making sure he really meant what he was about to say. Danny stood 10 feet away, still in his dress grays, the gold bars on his shoulders catching the afternoon light. He looked like his father, and nothing like his father all at once. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, yellowed with age, worn soft at the edges from handling. "This was you, wasn't it, the letter? My letter. The one I'd written in a hotel room the night before Aaron's wedding, when I still believed families stayed together no matter what." I nodded. He unfolded the paper with the same careful precision I'd used to write it. "They said you left, but this..." He gestured with the letter, his voice thick. "This feels like someone who never stopped loving us." The words hung between us like a bridge I'd been building for 15 years, without knowing if anyone would ever cross it. "I didn't leave," I said quietly. "I was erased." Danny's jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked exactly like Aaron when someone had hurt one of his soldiers. Ready to fight, ready to fix whatever was broken. "There's a bench," he said, nodding toward a small seating area near the visitor center. Could we sit for a minute?" We walked in silence. Danny sat first, and I took the far end of the bench, leaving space between us like I was afraid my presence might contaminate him. Old habits. He held the letter in both hands, treating it like something fragile. "I found this 2 weeks ago, in Dad's things, along with a photo of you and him when you were kids. He kept it. He kept everything. The box you made him, every letter you ever wrote." "Your picture," Danny looked at me sideways. "You were there all along, weren't you, in his life? In his things. He just never told anyone." I thought about Aaron's emails from deployment. The way he'd mentioned family without naming names. The careful way he'd talked about home without revealing which parts of home had been taken away. "Your father protected people," I said, "even when it cost him." "Like you protected him?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Danny was quiet for a long moment, staring at the letter. "I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks. About what you wrote. About what everyone's always said about you. And none of it adds up." He looked at me directly for the first time. Why didn't you fight back when they blamed you for missing the funeral? When they cut you out of everything? Why didn't you tell them what really happened? The answer sat in my chest like a stone I'd been carrying for 15 years. Because if I did, they'd have torn your father's memory apart just to destroy me. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Danny frowned. What do you mean? I closed my eyes. This was the part I'd never told anyone, the part that would have burned down everything Aaron had built if it had come out during those first raw months of grief. Your father called me the night before he died. Danny went very still. He was supposed to be in a training exercise the next morning, routine helicopter ops, but he was having second thoughts about one of the pilots, someone who'd been making mistakes, small ones but consistent. My voice felt rusty, like I hadn't used it in years. Aaron wanted to file a report, have the pilot grounded pending review, but his commanding officer had already approved the flight roster. It would have meant delays, paperwork, questions about Aaron's judgment. So what did he do? He called me, asked what I thought, and I told him. I had to stop, had to breathe. I told him not to rock the boat, that one more flight probably wouldn't matter, that he should wait and file the report after the exercise. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. The pilot made a mistake the next morning, I said. Mechanical error that could have been caught if someone had been paying attention. Aaron and 3 other men died because I told my brother not to trust his instincts. Danny stared at me. That's why you didn't come to the funeral. I couldn't face them, couldn't face your mother or your grandmother or anyone else who loved him, because they would have asked what his last phone call was about. And if I told them the truth, they would have blamed you for his death instead of just for missing his funeral. I nodded. Aaron's reputation would have been destroyed. People would have said he should have trusted his gut, should have stood up to his commanding officer, should have saved himself and his men. And your mother? She was barely holding on as it was. That would have broken her completely. Danny was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. So you let them blame you for abandoning the family instead of letting them blame you for getting him killed. It was easier for everyone that way. Easier for everyone except you. I looked at this young man who'd grown up without knowing me, who'd become everything his father had dreamed he could be, who was looking at me now like I was someone worth saving. Your father would have made the same choice, I said. And you know it. Danny folded the letter and put it back in his jacket. You were protecting all of us, even me, even though I didn't know you existed. You did know I existed, I said. Every unsigned birthday card, every $20 bill. You knew someone was thinking about you, even if you didn't know who. For the first time since this conversation started, Danny smiled. It was Aaron's smile, crooked and real and impossible to resist. You were there all along, he said, just invisible. That's what I do best. Maybe, he said, but I see you now. The restaurant was small and tucked away on a side street I'd never noticed before. The kind of place where the tables have red checkered tablecloths and the owner knows everyone's name. Danny had called 3 days after graduation. Short conversation, careful words, like he was feeling his way through a conversation in a foreign language. Would you like to have dinner, just to talk? There's some things I'd like to show you. I almost said no. 15 years of staying in the shadows doesn't disappear overnight. But something in his voice, Aaron's voice, made me say yes instead. He was already seated when I arrived, wearing civilian clothes that made him look younger. The wooden box sat on the table beside his water glass, along with the envelope I'd seen him carry at graduation. Thank you for coming, he said as I sat down. Thank you for asking. The waitress took our orders. Danny got chicken parmesan, I got soup and salad. Safe choices. The kind of meal you can eat even when your stomach is tied in knots. We didn't say much at first. Danny opened the box and showed me things I hadn't seen in decades. The watch our grandfather had left Aaron, a photo from his wedding day, a letter from basic training where he'd written about missing home. He kept everything, Danny said, handling each item like it was made of glass. Even stuff from when he was a kid, report cards, baseball trophies, a ticket stub from some movie you two saw in 1998. The Matrix, I said automatically. He made me watch it 3 times because he was convinced the special effects were going to change movies forever. Was he right? He usually was. Danny smiled at that. Not the careful, polite smile he'd been wearing since I sat down. A real one. We talked about Aaron in pieces. Small stories, safe memories. The time he'd tried to teach the neighbor's dog to fetch and ended up chasing the ball himself for an hour. The way he'd always eaten the marshmallows out of Lucky Charms, first leaving bowls of sad cereal shapes behind. He did that in the army too, Danny said. Mom used to send him care packages with those little bags of marshmallows because he couldn't find Lucky Charms on base. That sounds like him. The conversation felt fragile, like we were both afraid of saying the wrong thing and breaking whatever this was. But it also felt necessary, like we were putting pieces of a puzzle together that had been scattered for 15 years. When our plates were cleared and the coffee arrived, Danny reached into the box one more time. He pulled out the photograph. The one of me and Aaron on graduation day. 17 and 18 years old, arms around each other's shoulders like we could take on the world. He placed it on the table between us. "He'd want you here," Danny said simply. The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were dramatic or emotional, but because they were true. Aaron would want me here, at this table in this conversation in his son's life. Aaron had never been the kind of person who wrote people off. He'd believed in second chances and forgiveness, in the idea that family meant something more than just shared DNA. He would have fought for me if he'd lived, would have stood between me and the family's anger until they remembered who I really was, would have made sure his son knew the whole story, not just the parts that were easy to tell. But Aaron wasn't here, and I'd spent 15 years believing that meant I wasn't allowed to be here either. Looking at Danny now, this young man who'd sought me out, who'd carried my letter in his pocket for 2 weeks, who'd invited me to dinner just so he could put a photograph on a table, I realized how wrong I'd been. Aaron was here, in his son's face, in his son's voice, in his son's instinct to reach out instead of turning away. Aaron was here, and he was telling me it was okay to come home. I didn't cry. I'd learned a long time ago that tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. But I smiled soft and real for the first time in longer than I could remember. "Thank you," I said. Danny nodded and put the photograph back in the box, but carefully, like he was putting something precious away for safekeeping. "Same time next week," he asked. "I'd like that." As we walked out of the restaurant, Danny carrying the box under his arm, I felt something I hadn't felt in 15 years. I felt like I belonged somewhere, not to the whole family, maybe not ever to the whole family, but to this. To these conversations, these shared memories, this careful rebuilding of something that had been broken for too long. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. For now, it was enough. Outside the restaurant, the evening air carried the scent of summer rain and car exhaust. Streetlights were just beginning to flicker on casting long shadows across the sidewalk. Danny walked me to my truck, the wooden box tucked under his left arm like something he was protecting. We moved slowly, neither of us quite ready for this to end. At my driver's door, we stopped. "Thank you," I said again, because it was the only thing that felt big enough for what had happened tonight. "For finding me, for all of this. Thank you for letting me find you." I reached for my keys, but Danny cleared his throat. "Claire?" I turned back. He was standing differently now. Shoulders back, chin up, feet positioned with the precision that had been drilled into him over 4 years at West Point. The casual young man from dinner was gone, replaced by the officer he'd become. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his right hand to his forehead. A salute. Perfect form, held steady and sure. But this wasn't the salute of a cadet to a superior officer. This wasn't duty or protocol or military courtesy. This was respect, recognition, an acknowledgement of service that went deeper than rank or regulation. This was one soldier honoring another. For a moment, I just stood there. 15 years of staying invisible, of keeping my head down, of pretending I didn't deserve to take up space in the world. 15 years of believing I'd failed at everything that mattered. But Danny was looking at me like I was someone worth saluting. Like the choices I'd made, the sacrifices, the silence, the years of loving people from a distance had meant something. Like I was a soldier who'd served with honor even when no one was watching. I lifted my hand and returned the salute. Just once. Clean and sharp and final. For Aaron, who'd taught me what it meant to protect the people you love. For Danny, who'd grown into the kind of man who could see past 15 years of family mythology to find the truth underneath. For myself, maybe? For the woman who'd carried a secret that could have destroyed a family and chose to let them hate her instead. We held the salute for exactly 3 seconds. Then Danny dropped his hand and I dropped mine, and we were just 2 people standing next to a truck in a small town in Indiana. "Drive safe," he said. "You too." I got in my truck and started the engine. Danny stepped back onto the sidewalk, still holding that box with both hands now, still watching me like he was memorizing this moment. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught his reflection in my rearview mirror, standing under a streetlight, straight and tall, everything his father had believed he could become. They said I failed. They said I chose the army over family, said I was selfish and cold and cruel, said I broke their hearts when they were already broken. They said I failed my most important mission. But that boy, the man he's become, saw me. Really saw me. Saw through 15 years of carefully constructed silence to the truth I'd been protecting. He saw the sister who'd loved Aaron enough to carry his secrets, the aunt who'd watched from parking lots and sent unsigned birthday cards, and never stopped hoping he'd grow up to be exactly who he was. He saw me, and he decided I was worth knowing. And that's enough. Maybe it's not the redemption I'd imagined. Maybe it's not the family reunion where everyone realizes they were wrong and apologies flow like water and everything goes back to the way it was before. But it's real. It's true. It's built on honesty instead of mythology. And for the first time in 15 years, I don't feel like I'm failing anymore. I feel like I'm finally home. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk away quietly just to protect someone you loved. Sometimes the loudest redemption is the one nobody sees but you.